Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Merci. Bienvenue ici à cette conférence de presse modérée par la Tribune de la presse parlementaire canadienne. Moi, je suis Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada. Je vais passer la parole à quelques interlocuteurs et après, on va prendre les questions. S'il y a des gens qui sont en ligne, je vous invite à lever votre main virtuelle. On va commencer avec Susan O'Donnell de la Coalition pour le développement énergétique responsable au Nouveau-Brunswick.
Merci. Good morning. I'm Susan O'Donnell, visiting from Fredericton, the territory of the Wolastoqey, the people of the beautiful and bountiful river. This week, activists from east to west are excited to be here in Ottawa. This is not the nuclear week, not the nuclear lobby week. We're meeting with MPs to share information about small modular nuclear reactors, nuclear waste, and plutonium extraction. These issues are outside of partisan politics. They are of great importance to Canadians and to Canada's future. We would like to thank the 4 members of Parliament who accepted our invitation to share their views on these issues. Elizabeth May, Leader of the Green Party of Canada, MP for Saanich Gulf Islands. Mario Simard, Député de Jonquière, Bloc Québécois. Jenica Atwin, my MP for Fredericton, Liberal. And Alexandre Boulerice, MP for Rosemont-La Petite Patrie, NDP. I'm speaking for the Coalition for Responsible Energy Development in New Brunswick, and my colleague Ginette Charbonneau from Quebec is speaking for the Ralliement contre la pollution radioactive. More than 120 civil society groups signed a public statement calling SMRs dirty, dangerous distractions from real climate action. The nuclear industry, led by US and UK corporations and startups, has been lobbying and advertising heavily in Canada. The industry is trying to convince us that new, smaller reactor designs will somehow address the climate crisis and overcome the exorbitant cost, toxic radioactive waste, and nuclear accidents that have plagued the nuclear industry for decades. New nuclear is already far more expensive than proven renewable energy sources like wind and solar, and there is no guarantee that these nuclear experiments will ever generate electricity safely and affordably. We must prioritize affordable, reliable, quickly deployed and proven solutions, energy efficiency, and renewable energy technologies. While we're waiting to find out if SMR experiments will work, Canada is wasting time that must be spent urgently on genuine climate action. SMRs create new types of toxic radioactive waste that would be very costly and difficult to isolate from the environment for millions of years. People in New Brunswick, in Ontario, in Saskatchewan, and Alberta are concerned about the push to develop SMRs that could be abandoned in place, ultimately transforming their communities into radioactively contaminated sites and nuclear waste dumps. Some SMRs are planning to extract plutonium from nuclear fuel waste. This undermines global nuclear weapons non-proliferation agreements that Canada has helped achieve. Recycling and reprocessing as schemes to eliminate nuclear waste are fraudulent. These are the issues we're asking MPs to bring to their caucus colleagues. Ottawa must stop funding SMR development. Governments must do due diligence on the full costs and dangers of SMRs, the waste they will produce, and their long-term liabilities. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization must be required to report to Parliament on the additional costs and dangers of the unorthodox waste produced by SMRs before a site is selected for the proposed deep geological repository. We need an independent investigation into the nuclear weapons non-proliferation implications of plutonium extraction. Most SMRs are currently exempt from impact assessment, and all SMRs must be subject to the Impact Assessment Act. The Environment Minister has a request before him now to require an impact assessment for an experimental SMR planned for the Bay of Fundy. granting the IA would be Canada's chance to get this right for people and the planet. Thank you. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Dr. O'Donnell. C'est un grand plaisir pour moi d'être ici parmi mes collègues de tous les partis de MPD, libéral et Bloc québécois. Je dis un grand merci à tout le monde parce que nous sommes engagés dans un projet difficile, parce que le travail des lobbyistes est tellement avancé. C'est clair que dans la lutte contre le changement climatique, l'énergie nucléaire et les petits réacteurs modulaires sont une distraction sale et dangereuse. We're here and hoping to raise the reality and our voices that the done deal of federal and provincial millions of dollars flowing to so-called small modular reactors is fraud. It has no part in fighting the climate emergency. It, in fact, takes valuable dollars away from things that we know work, that can be implemented immediately in favor of untested and dangerous technologies that will not be able to generate a single kilowatt of electricity for a decade or more. And by the way, let's add to the words that Dr. O'Donnell used in describing this as the work of US and UK lobbyists and corporations. The real key player here, I wish, and I say it again, that the RCMP had actually investigated the SNC-Lavalin lobbying efforts that led to the resignation of former Justice Minister, the Honourable Jody Wilson-Raybould, and Jane Philpott. SNC-Lavalin tends to get what it wants regardless of who is in power. So back when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister, Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, a Crown corporation that had been the recipient of generous billions of dollars of subsidies for CANDU reactors and other operations across Canada, Atomic Energy of Canada Limited was sold to SNC-Lavalin for the bargain basement price of $15 million. Behind the SMR lobbying mania stands SNC-Lavalin. They're hidden. You can keep looking. They're behind the Moltex reactor in New Brunswick. They're behind the ARC New Brunswick reactor. SNC-Lavalin owns AECL and is the primary shareholder in Canadian nuclear laboratories. They're pretending that this reduces nuclear waste. It increases nuclear waste. And to create and risk creating a plutonium economy is to endanger the entire planet with the increased threat of nuclear war, theft of plutonium, terrorist assaults with dirty bombs. The story is a long one. As one recent letter writer to the Hill Times pointed out, we're entrusting to SNC-Lavalin a new untested bait of projects with nuclear reactors across the country involving plutonium fuel. And this is the same company that can't run a railway in Ottawa. So the question is, what could go wrong? Just about everything.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Mario.
Merci, merci Elisabeth. Heureux d'être ici avec des collègues dans une volonté non partisane pour parler, selon moi, d'une aberration. Considérer les petits réacteurs nucléaires comme étant de l'énergie propre, c'est une aberration. D'autant que je tiens à vous souligner que dans le budget fédéral, il y a 36,8 milliards de dollars qui vont être accordés aux énergies propres, ce qui veut dire que les petits réacteurs modulaires se qualifieraient pour avoir une portion de ces sommes-là qui sont fondamentales pour la transition énergétique. Et on sait très bien, on a fait la démonstration à travers de nombreuses études que ces petits réacteurs modulaires-là coûtent 10 fois plus cher que la production d'énergie par éolienne. Et également, il y a une étude de l'Université de Sussex qui s'échelonne sur 25 ans, qui fait la démonstration que tous les pays qui ont essayé le nucléaire comme source d'énergie propre ont lamentablement échoué. Donc, le Canada devrait prendre ça en considération et faire comme le fait l'Europe, c'est-à-dire ne pas considérer le nucléaire comme pouvant être une énergie propre. Et au demeurant, moi, je me rappelle que l'an dernier, au comité des ressources naturelles, dans le cadre des crédits qui ont été étudiés, on voyait apparaître 1,6 million de dollars qui étaient dédiés au Conseil national de recherche sur les petits réacteurs modulaires. Et ça, c'était une demande spécifique du secteur gazier pétrolier. Le secteur gazier pétrolier qui espère remplacer dans ses procédés l'utilisation de gaz pour en avoir plus, veut utiliser des petits réacteurs modulaires. Donc là, on est dans une autre dimension où on cherche à produire plus de gaz, plus de pétrole en utilisant le nucléaire. Et ça, si ça fait partie de la stratégie de transition du Canada, à mon humble avis, on va être la risée de l'ensemble des pays avancés qui cherchent à produire de nouvelles énergies propres. Donc, clairement, il faut mettre fin à cette aberration qui fait en sorte qu'on considère les petits réacteurs modulaires comme étant de l'énergie propre. Et il faut concentrer, à mon avis, les 36 milliards de dollars qui seront là pour les 10 prochaines années sur le financement de réelles énergies propres.
Merci. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I also want to acknowledge that I represent a riding on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Williston-Gallic people, and we're here today on the unsurrendered Anishinaabe territory. I want to be clear that I'm here as an individual, a concerned individual, a mother, and as a member of Parliament for Fredericton. My job is to represent the voices of my home community here in Ottawa, and that's what I'm doing today. In my riding, there are many different perspectives on the prospects of small modular nuclear reactors, and if they are the right choice for Canada at this critical time in our history. I don't believe that all those voices are being heard, as some are louder than others, and it's important for me to support the work of those whose aim it is to inform Canadians about this emerging technology, including the associated risks and the many unknowns. I'm here today to participate in this all-party event because I believe that collaboration and dialogue make good policy, and when it comes to nuclear, there is no margin for error. At this time, my concern is that small modular nuclear reactors, especially those that may find their way to our beautiful Bay of Fundy, New Brunswick, to replace the aging Point Lepreau reactor, are still unproven technology that have diverted significant resources and time that we do not have. We are in a climate crisis, and because of this, we're in a race against time to find the silver bullet to net zero, and my goal today and every day is to ensure we have a full picture so we can make the best decisions possible, decisions that will impact the lives of Canadians for generations to come. This is a time of action. We do not have the luxury of waiting to see if things will pan out. I am grateful to my colleagues from all sides of the House for being here today to come together to ask tough questions and to ensure that Canadians are informed. A special thanks to CRED-NB for their efforts and for Dr. Susan O'Donnell from my home riding for all she does for the sake of the planet. Merci. Thank you.
Bonjour tout le monde. Merci beaucoup de l'invitation. Ça me fait plaisir d'être ici, même si c'est un sujet qui est éminemment préoccupant. Juste rappeler, vous le savez tous plus que moi, mais quand même que l'infrastructure de prise de décision puis gouvernementale au Canada sur l'énergie nucléaire est assez particulière, pour dire quelque chose de simple. La Commission canadienne de sûreté nucléaire dépend du ministère des Ressources humaines, qui a dans son mandat la promotion de l'énergie nucléaire. Donc, il y a là déjà un potentiel conflit d'intérêts ou un mélange des genres. Et ensuite de ça, quand on regarde la Société de gestion des déchets nucléaires, mais elle est essentiellement formée par des producteurs d'énergie nucléaire. Donc, ceux qui ont intérêt à nous dire qu'il n'y a pas de problème, parce que c'est avec ça qu'ils dégagent leur profit, c'est leur chiffre d'affaires vient de là. Alors déjà, le cadre législatif, réglementaire, de prise de décision est un peu vicié au départ. Et là, on a tous les lobbying, les SNC-Lavalin de ce monde qui viennent s'en mêler, qui viennent nous dire il n'y a pas de problème. Et là, on fait face à un effet de mode en ce moment. Les petits réacteurs modulaires, c'est comme ce qui est hype. C'est comme le nouveau truc de l'industrie pour nous faire croire qu'il n'y aura pas de problème. Mais nous, ce qu'on dit aujourd'hui, c'est minute papillon, là. Ça fait des déchets nucléaires encore. C'est pas réglé, ce problème-là. Alors là, on a une nouvelle technologie, pleine de promesses, mais qui n'a pas réellement été testée. qui risque de produire de l'électricité et de l'énergie à un très haut coût, ça va nous coûter une fortune, qui fait encore des déchets nucléaires et qui risque d'être mis dans des territoires autochtones à l'encontre de l'article 29.2 de la Déclaration des Nations Unies sur les droits des Premières Nations. Alors, il y a toute une série de problèmes ici qu'on voit venir à l'avance. Puis comme l'ont dit mes collègues, alors qu'il y a urgence d'agir, mais utilisons ces milliards de dollars de fonds publics pour investir dans des énergies qui sont réellement renouvelables, réellement propres et dont on sait qu'elles fonctionnent. Merci.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez bien? Bon, alors je suis Ginette Charbonneau du Ralliement contre la pollution radioactive. Alors je vais complémenter ce que mes collègues ont dit. Alors le principal problème à la source, c'est que le ministère des Ressources naturelles a un mandat contradictoire, développer le nucléaire et gérer les déchets nucléaires. Alors ils font bien le premier, mais très mal le deuxième. D'accord? Alors présentement, il y a cette ignorance des déchets nucléaires, des petits réacteurs modulaires. Alors, il y a des rumeurs qui disent qu'ils vont recycler les déchets, mais c'est faux. Ils vont générer des déchets encore plus complexes associés à des sels, ce qui fait que ça s'enflamme facilement. Donc, il ne pourra pas être mis dans des dépôts géologiques profonds parce que ça pourrait causer des explosions, d'accord? Et puis, c'est très coûteux. Et ce qui me hérisse totalement, c'est que chaque fois qu'ils développent des projets nucléaires, ils ne se penchent jamais sur les conséquences des déchets radioactifs qui vont durer des millions d'années. Et c'est le cas des petits réacteurs modulaires. Et imaginez, la nouvelle loi sur l'évaluation d'impact, ils ont tout fait pour exclure les petits réacteurs modulaires. D'accord? Alors, même dans une région éloignée, dès qu'ils ont moins de 200 mégawatts thermiques, ils n'ont pas besoin d'études d'impact. OK? Sur les centrales nucléaires existantes, ils ont droit jusqu'à 900 mégawatts thermiques. Mais voyons donc, ça n'a pas de sens. Pourquoi on donne des privilèges dangereux à des petits réacteurs qui vont nuire à la population? Et éventuellement, les petits réacteurs modulaires, ils vont probablement être abandonnés dans des lieux éloignés. Et certains d'entre eux vont servir pour extraire le pétrole des sables bitumineux, comme si on avait besoin de ça. Alors moi, je suis révoltée d'écouter tout ça. Si les gens pensent que ça va régler pour le climat, vraiment, ça ne va pas régler pour le climat. Ils ne vont pas être prêts à temps. Du tout, et puis c'est très dangereux pour la santé de la population. Et puis deuxièmement, il y a cette histoire du plutonium. Bon, il faut du plutonium dans les petits réacteurs modulaires. Le Canada a signé un traité de non-prolifération des armements nucléaires. Alors, qui respecte ses engagements? On n'en veut pas de plutonium. C'est très dangereux de faire une bombe avec du plutonium. Alors ça, ce sont les principaux arguments, d'accord? Un autre point chaud, là, c'est qu'il faudrait absolument que quand le gouvernement consulte la population, qu'il l'écoute. On sort d'une consultation pour une politique sur les déchets nucléaires. On a travaillé très fort, très consciencieusement. Ils ne nous ont pas écoutés. Et là, maintenant, il y aura une stratégie aussi. Ils ne vont pas nous écouter. Alors, on est tout à fait contre les petits réacteurs modulaires et contre l'extraction du plutonium. OK.
Très bien, c'est ce qui met fin aux allocutions. Je vais passer la parole aux gens dans la salle. So we will now move to questions. So it's please one question, one follow-up. Please identify yourself and your media organization, please. And you can push the little button in front of you on the microphone base. Maybe, peut-être monsieur...
Mark Ramsey, National Post. This might be a question for Dr. O'Donnell. You said this was a all-party thing. Were any Conservative MPs invited, and what was their response?
Yes, we did invite a Conservative MP who was unable to come. Yes.
What was the reason?
that they were otherwise occupied at this time. Thank you.
Kevin Philippopoulos with the Hill Times. Question for Ms. Atwin. We've heard the Prime Minister and other cabinet ministers make fairly bullish statements on using nuclear energy as part of the energy transition. Are you an outlier in your party, or are there other MPs who kind of share your either skepticism or wish to find out more before decisions are made?
I'm used to being an outlier oftentimes. I think people can see that by now. But I've been, very open with my personal opinion on this and in bringing the voices of my constituency forward as well. And so, I've had conversations with my colleagues and they're certainly open to pursuing research and understanding more about the process. But I mean, we're also looking at, an energy crisis. We're looking at, the Atlantic Loop. We're looking at greening our grids. And finding the best way to get there. And so really everyone's quite open-minded at this time. And so I'm grateful for my colleagues that they allow me to, express my opinions and have those conversations to, add to the information that's been presented.
And follow-up, this could be for Dr. O'Donnell or for anyone. We hear a lot about baseload power and how in areas where hydro is not available, it has to be oil or gas or nuclear. But we also hear about ways in which energy can be transmitted east-west, let's say. And so what should we be thinking about when it comes to alternatives to using nuclear as baseload power?
Mm-hmm. I think the issue really is storage, and nuclear requires storage as well. We have to be looking at distributed grids. A lot of experts are saying that the concept of baseload power is actually outmoded in terms of the kinds of grids that we have to be building out. But if you do want to be talking about baseload power, for example, there's various different options for that. Like the storage, we can look at extracting heat under the earth, for example. There's a really interesting company in Calgary called Ever that's looking at how they can make baseload power from extracting pushing in water and extracting water under the earth, for example, and getting thermodynamic energy from that. That would potentially offer some kind of transition opportunities for oil and gas workers who would be using the same kind of technology. But basically, there's lots of different alternatives as long as we look at storage in a distributed grid. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I wanted to add to point to something that's already happening around the world and for which Canada has lots of opportunity. And I completely agree with what Dr. O'Donnell said. This is about how you store energy. And the grid can essentially be a giant battery if we have a good, robust national grid that works east, west, and north, south. But beyond that, I want to point to the relationship between Denmark and Norway. Denmark produces so much wind power that it can't use it all. And when it has excess, it sends it to Norway. Norway uses the excess wind power from Denmark to pump water up into an existing reservoir. So it's pumped storage. It's elegant. It's simple. It's used around the world. And when there is a moment in Norway where they need more energy, all they do is open the sluices, creating essentially what we'd call hydropower from a waterfall, but it's controlled. And once that's generated electricity, the excess wind from Denmark, once again, can be used to pump that same water back up into the reservoir to wait till it's needed. The solutions are abundant. The renewable energy alternatives keep dropping in price, and the nuclear alternatives continue to rise in price. There'd be no interest in small modular reactors if it wasn't for the pro-nuclear lobby. It's not based on evidence.
Any other questions in the room? Yes?
This question could go out to anybody, but I'm wondering how closely have you been observing the pro-nuclear lobby, and out of their activities, what strikes you as most effective in what they're doing on the Hill right now?
I could start with that. Which organization do you represent?
Oh, sorry, I was in photo taking mode. I'm with Canada's National Observer.
Oh, thank you. Okay. It's been very interesting. I'll speak for New Brunswick. That's the area that I'm most interested in terms of what the industry has been doing. One of the concerns that we have, for example, is the industry has been successful in reaching out to students effectively in high schools. And so they've developed curriculum. And in New Brunswick, for example, they've been given free rein to speak directly, the nuclear industry directly to high school students. There was even a competition recently. And there was a prize for high school students to write a essay on what is your favorite SMR, for example. So they have many different ways of getting into things. And of course, then the children go home and speak to their parents, et cetera. And this is very strategic. It's done strategically. So I would say there's a lot of behind the scenes happening. Certainly, I mean, we absolutely know about the nuclear lobby in terms of, speaking with politicians directly. And of course, speaking with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, there's no question that the nuclear industry has far more access to the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission in terms of, raising different concerns about SMRs. So that would be, their direct access would be one, but maybe others have seen other kinds of,
Just quickly, then I turn to my colleagues, but in many ways, the nuclear industry doesn't need to lobby Ottawa. It owns Natural Resources Canada. It owns Natural Resources Canada as a civil service because that's where AECL was housed for so long. So when Minister Wilkinson stands up and says that, quote, there is no path to net zero that doesn't include nuclear, unquote, that's not true. But I'm quite certain that he's been advised that's the case from people within Natural Resources Canada who for decades have defended billions of dollars wasted in sending it to AECL.
Yeah. In a nutshell, I think that they don't have to knock on the door to get into the house because they own the house.
And just one brief follow-up, if I may, to the education side of things. Has there been any efforts by anti-nuclear or nuclear cautious groups to take advantage of some of those same opportunities to speak to students that you know of?
Yes, we have. But for example, in New Brunswick, we have what's called a Centre for Excellence in Energy that's run by our Provincial Education Department that's funded by the nuclear industry and the Department of Education, and NB Power, I should say, which is our big nuclear operator. And so, yes, we have tried to get our material on their website, for example, and I think we have one success out of something like 100 different pieces of information there. We have one in there. The question is how actively is our Department of Education making sure that the students are being informed about all aspects of nuclear power and the SMRs, including the risks involved, when they're only being exposed to the promotional and sales material of the nuclear industry.
Si vous permettez, je me permets une question. Un des arguments qui revient souvent pour ces petits modules, c'est que ça permettrait d'alimenter des communautés autochtones éloignées dans le Nord. Ne voyez-vous pas là peut-être un avantage qu'il faudrait observer parce qu'il y a beaucoup de communautés qui dépendent de génératrices au diesel, etc. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez de cet argument-là? C'est ouvert.
Moi, ce qui me préoccupe, c'est le moment où j'ai le plus entendu parler de ces petits réacteurs modulaires-là, c'était pour l'industrie gazière pétrolière. Les sommes d'argent qui avaient été redirigées vers le conseil de recherche, c'était à la demande du secteur gazier pétrolier. Leur objectif, quand le conflit en Ukraine a été déclenché, où on voyait une opportunité pour exporter plus de gaz en Europe, une de ces façons d'exploiter plus de gaz en Europe, c'est de réduire le gaz qu'on utilise dans les procédés pour extraire le gaz et le pétrole. Et donc, la solution pour eux, c'était les petits réacteurs nucléaires. Donc, il faut voir au-delà de l'altruisme qui est de fournir une énergie propre qui ne l'est pas dans les faits aux communautés autochtones. Et il y a aussi un agenda du secteur gazier pétrolier pour ces petits réacteurs-là. Et de savoir que le secteur gazier pétrolier va gruger une bonne partie du 36 milliards de dollars qui va être voué aux énergies propres avec les captations de carbone, c'est quand même, avec les stratégies de captation de carbone, c'est quand même assez inquiétant. Donc, je pense qu'il y a une interrelation à faire aussi avec un des plus grands lobbies qu'il y a au Canada, qui est le secteur gazier pétrolier, qui pousse sur cet agenda du nucléaire.
Je m'excuse, je peux répondre en anglais, juste pour d'être clairement. Really, I'm seeing a lot of efforts to include Indigenous leadership in these conversations and to perhaps, sign accommodation agreements and have it, avoid, potential issues down the line with Indigenous voices who may be against. I feel that it's exactly what we're talking about as far as disseminating the proper information. What does it mean to have the duty to consult? What is pre-prior and informed consent? How does that operate? And we know in the province of New Brunswick that those are policies that we stand by, but we don't always often share what the process looks like. And I don't believe that the message is getting down to every individual Indigenous member in communities in New Brunswick. So there's conversations happening with leadership, with groups that represent the nation. So Willistic Nation, New Brunswick, for example. And so it's again an opportunity for us to say, well, there's other components we need you to consider here, especially when dealing with traditional territories and natural habitats, especially areas so precious to us like the Bay of Fundy. And so that's really the work that I'm trying to do locally on the ground as well, is ensure that they know that there are other voices out there. There is other information that they need to also consider when determining if they're going to give consent to these companies to operate.
Thank you for the question. I think it's important to remember that these SMRs don't exist. They haven't been built yet. And one of the reasons that we're here today is because they are such a bad investment that private sector money isn't rolling into them, and they're going to need billions of dollars in public funds. And so they're selling these promises to First Nations across the country and saying that if we have First Nations buy-in, and this is what they're hoping for, if they have First Nations buy-in, that somehow the federal government's going to come up with billions of dollars to build these things. However, there was a study by Dr. M.V. Ramana at the University of British Columbia who worked with his students who actually looked at the economics of building, of actually rolling out small modular reactors to remote communities across the country that are currently on diesel power. There's not enough demand for energy to justify building the reactors at a rate in a factory that would lower the price to a level that they could possibly be affordable. So it's just a pipe dream. All they're trying to do is get First Nations buy-in so they can try and get the government to hand over billions of dollars to build these things. Because again, they're such a bad investment that no private sector money is going into them.
Juste un ajout là-dessus. La mise en place de ce petit réacteur modulaire dans des communautés autochtones doit être faite avec ce qu'on appelle le consentement libre, préalable et éclairé des peuples autochtones. En ce moment, il y a une absence d'information. Ces technologies-là n'ont pas encore été mises en œuvre réellement. Et la relation du gouvernement fédéral en ce moment avec beaucoup de Premières Nations et de peuples autochtones, il n'y a pas cette relation de confiance puis de dialogue effectif. Un exemple, le chef Niganobé de la nation Anishinabek, qui participait à des consultations, qui se demandait, avec de la méfiance sur la gestion propre et correcte des déchets nucléaires. Il s'est fait répondre par un représentant de la Société de gestion des déchets nucléaires que nous pourrions vous l'expliquer, mais vous ne le comprendriez pas de toute façon.
Any other questions in the room, maybe for another round? I don't have questions online. If you, yes?
One, again, from the Hill Times. This could be for anyone. Following up earlier on the questions of alternatives to nuclear, the reservoirs sound great, of different altitudes, but are these available at scale that would be required? Would it be a combination of different, where each local community, depending on the geography and stuff, it's a different thing? Is there the scale that would have, where we have an industry that exists already?
I think there's always choices, and that's what we're talking about. Like these reactors, they might be promising them for 2030, but there's no way they're going to be ready for 2030. All the research says no. The experts have said that the 2 reactors for New Brunswick, for example, will have trouble reaching commercial viability by 2050. And I'd be happy to send you the data on that. So we're talking about a long lead time. If we want to talk about building up alternatives to nuclear, or what we need, for example, for storage, we have 10 years to be improving on whatever we need to do to improve the storage capacities, because the reactors are so far down the line that they couldn't possibly come on when we need them, and we have lots of opportunities. Thank you.
If I may, Kevin, I just wanted to point out other opportunities. It would not be one sole choice for Canada for where we store our energy. Fundamentally, we need to improve the grid. That was recognized in this year's budget for the first time, east, west, and north, south. We can improve pumped storage. I know of one entrepreneurial private sector interest out of Calgary that was looking at any abandoned quarry that could be converted, a lot of them on Indigenous lands, into a place for pumped storage. Any hole at any level can become pumped storage. As well, there are about 100,000 abandoned oil wells in Alberta. According to Alberta government data, about 10% of them have enough heat at depth to produce geothermal electricity without any need for new fuel, perpetual sources of clean electricity in Alberta right now, using the same people and workers who dug the well in the first place to ensure that it's converted to producing geothermal electricity. There's tidal power, and we mentioned sun and wind, which are the ones that are dropping in cost the most. Okotoks, Alberta now has a large solar facility producing electricity at 3 cents a kilowatt hour. You can expect that to be 10 times more and 10 years away, even if SMRs can be made to work. So the suite of measures we have that, as Dr. O'Donnell said, the notion of baseload power is basically an anachronism. Storing energy, using the grid as a battery, taking what you need, putting back when you don't need it. We have elegant solutions in Canada. We don't lack for solutions as ever. We only lack for political will to implement them.
Maybe another question? Yep.
The Prime Minister said that nuclear energy might be necessary to increase the grid and in the transition to cleaner energy. Do you foresee any way to approach nuclear energy that might be safer?
Well, first of all, I think the Prime Minister needs better advisors. That's what I would say. Because if he's not aware that it's possible to build out an entirely renewable system with storage, then he's not getting the best advice possible, because that research is out there. There's lots of reports out there. Certainly, will be potentially, although there's even alternatives for that right now, not nuclear power reactors for making medical isotopes, but research reactors are being used for medical isotopes. We certainly don't need nuclear power reactors to do that, even though there are many alternatives for that. So I think there is a role for some potentially research going on, but not in nuclear power, because we don't need nuclear power. Thank you.
Other questions before we wrap up? OK. Merci beaucoup. Merci tout le monde. Merci aux interprètes qui étaient avec nous aujourd'hui. Merci beaucoup. Bonne journée à tous.